We've made it through another work week. It is 4:33 a.m. here in the Eastern time zone of the United States, wherever and whenever you are. It is Friday, July 7th, 2023. Over half this year is already gone. Yesterday, we were in Genesis 29, and we see these marriages that Jacob has where he's tricked by his uncle Laban. Uh, just something to think about as we approach today, which is like the what 20 years ago we would have probably called a soap opera kind of a story, uh, and what today we would probably call reality TV at its worst. But before we start today's reading, just a thought about Jacob. So we see him fall in love with Rachel purely on looks. And there was probably more to her, but just keep that in mind as we're reading through this, that Jacob's initial decisions were based on what he saw, uh, and that's a problem for all of us if we take that route. So just kind of throw that in there as a bonus from yesterday. Picking up today in verse 31 of 29 of chapter 29. And then we're going to go through a part of chapter 30 down to verse 8. This is the first six of Jacob's 12 sons. Now, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "The Lord was surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me a son also." And she called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I've borne him three sons." Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I will die." And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, excuse me, Am I in the place of God who's withheld the fruit of your womb?" So she said, "Here is my maid Bilnah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I may have children by her." Then she gave him Bilnah, her maid, as a wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilnah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, has judged my case, and he's heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilnah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed." So she called his name Naphtali. All right. I said that this would be a soap opera 20, 30 years ago. It'd be a reality TV show today. That is, uh, I think, a great way to explain this. I've read some commentators who called this the Battle of the Wives. That would be a great name for this if this were a reality show. It's important to remember this was reality. No TV cameras, but it was reality. We see a lot to start to unfold in character. So in Leah, first of all, we know that she is unloved. It already said that Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. The impression here is that he wasn't very loving for Leah at all. That was just totally obligatory. So Leah shows a character of being a godly woman, though, which we don't see from Rachel, which I'll talk about in just a second. But It says that the Lord saw Leah was unloved. To me, that just David Gregory translation, it looks like she was going to God about it and that he saw and heard and he opened her womb. So this says God opened her womb. This is not just her getting pregnant. When the Bible says specifically that God opened her womb, then this was something that God intended specifically to happen. So then she starts conceiving children. And the first one, the name Reuben means see, a son. The second one means Simeon means heard or he hears. The third name, Levi, means attached. And then the fourth name, Judah, means praise. We see this progression. We see Leah wanting so bad to be loved, and she's praising God all along the way. But we see a progression from right at the first son, where she's really wanting, like her number one thing is to be loved properly by her husband, by Jacob. And she's trying to show her value to Jacob by having sons, which would have been a huge value because that's how the your line is passed down through a son. But you see her shift from wanting to please Jacob and be loved by Jacob to with by the time she got to her fourth son, it looks like Leah has understood that being loved and led by God is actually more important than being loved by Jacob or by and that's a great lesson for us that being loved by another person is awesome. Understanding that we're loved and being led by God is a whole nother level, as one of my good friend, Pastor Bob, would say. Then we see Rachel, and Rachel does not appear to be a godly woman. Rachel appears to be that person who's all looks and not a lot of character, which again goes to Jacob's judgment on these things and shows that, at least on the surface here, it appears that he was only looking at the surface because she doesn't seem to be the godly woman that God would have steered him to. But with Rachel, so she sees this. By the way, this is, if you take the whole of this and start doing math, which we'll do at some point maybe, this is not chronological. When Moses wrote this, it wasn't that Leah had these four kids and then this stuff happened with Rachel. It was intermingled in the four that Rachel was having these issues. So if you keep that in mind as we look at this, I think Moses wrote it this way so we could see the conflict between these sisters, between these wives, and kind of feel it more as we read the reality of the situation and the levity of it. So she is upset because she can't have children, Rachel, the object of Jacob's affection. So she goes to him and she blames him. Seeing that he's already able to get her sister pregnant, it's obviously kind of not his fault. You make the assumption that he is having sexual relations with Rachel, so it's not him. It's her womb that's closed. And we seem to believe that God has closed Rachel's womb for now because he's trying to allow Rachel to grow and mature and look to him instead of her, and maybe him instead of looking at the mirror at her beauty. So she goes and she blames Jacob, and Jacob's reaction is very telling too. If you remember, back days ago when Jacob's mother, Rebecca, was barren, when she couldn't have a child, Isaac, Jacob's father, he went to God about it. He went to God and prayed for his wife to be able to bear children. Jacob had that opportunity here. He had that opportunity before with Rachel, but here instead of taking that opportunity when seeing that Rachel was totally upset, and obviously she's blaming him, and instead he feels like his manhood is being challenged, but instead of taking that, deflecting it, and saying, "Hey, there's a reason that you're not getting pregnant. Let's go to God about it and inquire of Him." No, he uses actually God as kind of a counterpunch on her when he says, "Am I in the place of God who's withheld from fruit from you?" And basically, he's saying, "Hey, you need to. God did this to you. It's your fault. I mean, it's God that's doing it, not to me." Instead of going to God, he uses God as kind of a counterpunch, and there's a lesson for us not to do that as well. Then we get into the real kind of reality show thing about it, where she's, instead of her going to God, she just takes matters in her own hands, kind of like Sarai did uh, before. You know, the difference is when Sarai did it before with Abraham, she was doing it because they didn't have any kids. She was doing it because she was wrongfully trying to take matters in her own hands, but her motives were to give Abraham a son so he could have a descendant that she couldn't give him, or she didn't feel like she could give him. Here, it is purely competitive. There's already at least one son. If we'll talk again about the chronology, there's more than one, but not all four yet. But it's totally a competitive thing that Rachel is having. So she gives him her maidservant. He goes and has sex with the maidservant. She gets pregnant, has a kid. Rachel names that kid Dan, which means judged or vindicated. Then the maid the maid gets pregnant again, and Rachel names that kid Naphtali, which means struggle or wrestle. It says that she says that God has judged my case and also heard my voice, but it is really apparent that even though she uses God's name, that she's still not focused in the right thing. It's all about her pride, her envy, her jealousy. We see that she wanted children for her value. Leah wanted children so that she'd be loved by her husband. So different, far, far different motives. Now, I said that that movie or that series, The Handmaid's Tale, and there's been other things too, and then people using the Bible like it shouldn't be used and saying horrible things about what the Bible directs us to do, which is not here. They use this section in The Handmaid's Tale to totally distort what God's direction is. So that's another part of the soap opera, reality TV, miniseries, whatever that this would be. My challenge, what I draw today, what I challenge us today with, is to look at these two women and to look at the way, because we see that their motives are very, very different. This word, I think that's not. But Leah went to God. God saw her. She thanked, praise, and by the way, that fourth child is the, the would be the eventual lineage of Jesus. You seem to have the right character and the right motives with our decision, direction, and